Welcome to the Trouble with Writing podcast, where we chat about the real issues that stop multilingual writers producing effective English and see where we can help. Hi, Pete. Hi, Paul.
Hey, guys.
Philip, how are you? Hi, Peter. How are you?
Good, thanks. How's it going?
Really good. How's the weather where you guys are?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, here in Chile, it's been pretty bad weather actually. It's been raining a lot, but luckily now it's just the sun's coming out. So yeah, it's kind of unusually bad weather. Although we are going into winter, and we probably need some rain. What about in La Palma, right? Phil, you always have great weather there.
Yeah, it's called Gran Canaria is known as the island of eternal spring. So it's normally nice weather. Sometimes in summer, actually, there's a cloud which hangs over the city and it's called Donkey Belly, which is kind of funny, but there's no Donkey Belly today. It's pretty sunny and yeah, all good here.
Donkey Belly.
What about you, Paul?
Well, it's now normally this time of year we have beautiful clear skies, temperatures up to about 30. Last year we crossed 30 and got even hotter. I'm on the west coast of Canada, and in this area it rains 7-8 months a year. Right, Vancouver is notorious for its rain. I think it rains more than in the UK. Starting in October, it will rain until March. And then this year, unlike previous years, June was not hot and sunny. It was more rain. So now it looks like we're going to have July and August as a summer, and that's it. One thing I don't like about Canada is that summers are gorgeous, but they're so brief.
Right.
So Canadians kind of go through that thing and the rest of Canada, gets snow all winter, but the West Coast gets rain and mild temperatures. So you have to kind of survive that to get to the measly 2 months of summer. So, and today is Canada Day, so there's celebrations and festivals all over the place, including right outside my door.
All right, interesting. Yeah. It's actually a Carnival here as well today, weirdly, because it was sort of postponed from February, and now the city is sort of celebrating it this weekend. So I think it's probably going to start in a couple of hours. So I'm just about escaping the noise outside my door, but I'll be taking a look. Yeah, it should be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Carnival over there is great. Also in Tenerife, I've heard it's amazing.
Since this is our first podcast, maybe we should ask how do we come together? I've kind of lost track of how we've come together and managed to meet here on this podcast.
Yeah, I guess because we're doing similar things, right? So we all help people with writing, or the different types of writing, right? For example, what type of writing do you work with, Phil? What type of clients?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a fiction writer, so I really enjoy helping people with creative writing. I actually work a lot with content writers and bloggers as well. So yeah, people who are maybe freelancers or staff writers for publications. So yeah, I'd say a variety, but mostly those things: creative writing and sort of blogging. What about you, Pete?
Oh yeah. So I work with journalists, and of course that is also can be quite broad. So there are different genres within journalism. So some of my clients they want a more traditional. They use a more traditional journalistic style. Others a more literary journalistic style. But yeah, journalism is the name of the game. What about you, Paul?
Well, I work mostly with academic writers, whether they're young post-high school students, international students coming to Canada to prepare for university, or university students. I also work with some professors whose second language or other language is English, and they want to polish their papers before publication. But it's interesting because although I enjoy academic writing and certainly have written my share of essays. My first writing passion is creative writing, fiction writing, screenwriting, drama. And I got into teaching English and thus coaching and academic coaching and even paper editing as a way of buying myself more time to write my own stuff. But it's kind of, my focus has kind of shifted, and the academic coaching has taken over most of my work. So unlike Philip, I actually don't like working with creative writers. I prefer that to be my really private, personal writing, right? I do that every morning. And then the rest of the day. So I kind of like that distinction of working with academic writers, even though I myself may be a different kind of writer. I'm not sure why that is.
That's really interesting.
I mean, I guess.
Yeah. Go on, Phil.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I guess to answer your question, Pete, apart from us doing similar things, is, we came together because I guess we all see that the world is changing so much in terms of writing and who is writing. It's so much more open, and that's great that, people whose first language is not English have the opportunity to publish and to sort of share their voice with the world. Someone from anywhere with a good level of English can be, a journalist or a novelist or an academic writer. And that's great. And I guess we came together to try and help those people navigate where the line is between, being understandable and effective, but yet also maintaining their own sort of viewpoint.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, it's so great to share different perspectives around the world in a common language. It's really important.
It's interesting too, because now we have, not we three, but writers everywhere have this opportunity, and social media and various online platforms allow their voice to be seen. And I think at the same time, there's sort of a de-emphasis of writing, because everyone thinks you can just post anything or just put a video up. And I think now more than ever, because of this proliferation of means, writing skill is something valuable. I think it's a superpower. And I think, we text message. That's a form of writing. So I think we're using writing now more than ever. So it's more important than ever. And yet I meet a lot of young students, particularly, who tell me, oh, I don't like writing, or I don't like reading. I just want to, talk in English. And then they get to a professional level, or they get into a hobby level of posting or copywriting, and they realize, oh gosh, I guess I am a writer. And then they realize they need help.
Yeah. But going back 100%. To what you said, Paul, which is interesting that that you like creative writing as kind of part of your what you do privately, and then you with your clients you work with academic writing, and that's a really interesting contrast, because it's a different style, right? Which is the name of the game today, right? This is what we're going to talk about today, and it's going to be really interesting to see, how writing in different types of writing, different genres, how that affects the style. What is the best style for our audiences, right, in different genres? And I think, Phil, are you going to kick us off with this?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I guess to try and answer the question, what is style? It's pretty difficult. I think we probably all have our own idea of what writing style is and how that might differ between languages. I mean, I'd say a few things that what it doesn't include is, being accurate. So we're maybe not talking about whether we're using a comma or a semicolon, and we're not talking about, if our words are in the correct order. It's more about things which make the writing and the sentences sound natural, so that they can be well understood by, everyone around the world, really, but that they conform to a way which is, sounds natural. I think especially to people whose first language is English and are very used to reading high level, high quality texts with style. Obviously, for me, style is maybe quite different to you guys, because I work with creative writing, or certainly writing which is less functional. Even people who are writing blogs might be able to produce content which is more emotive, more exclamatory, more fun, more creative. I think my biggest point on what's important about style would probably be making sure your sentences are not all the same. They're not built in the same way. I think most people watching would probably know, English is a subject, verb, object language. We like things in that order. And so if you build a basic sentence, it normally goes something like that. He walked to the park. Now that becomes a problem if you're just doing it over and over again. Imagine a story which is, Phil walked to the park, Phil took out a sandwich, Phil sat down on a park bench, Phil watched the geese, Phil ate his sandwich. We're already getting bored because it sounds like a machine is doing the writing. And it's something I find quite a lot when international writers are sort of trying to produce creative writing. They're not thinking about how to vary sentences. They're often thinking about how to be correct. So they'd often prefer to write these short, simple sentences, in a particular order. And it is super important in narrative writing, in creative writing, that almost every sentence is varied. Is that something that you guys find in your professions as well? Do you see a lot of your writers, the people you work with, doing the same?
I think in terms of the clients I've had generally, I would not necessarily see that as one of their main problems, because I think what they do is they all have a writing their writing style in their first language, and I think what they try to do is they try to translate it, not as translate word for word, but try to get the similar style in English. So they try already to kind of replicate. That's the word I was looking for. Replicate that style. But in general, for journalists, it is obviously important, especially if you move a little bit away from the more traditional journalism, then obviously it's important to vary sentence structure like you're talking about, so that it keeps an interesting rhythm, so it doesn't bore readers. So it's important.
Yeah.
I think that's
a good point about that word rhythm too. I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point too, Pete, is that whenever we write, we're writing for a personal reason, but we have to remember that it's meant to be read. There is a relationship with a reader, and that reader, you don't know that reader. So readability is an important factor in style of, I think, of any genre of writing, because you want to get to the point where you can write something that's not just clear, it's not just functional, it's not even just beautiful, but it is a good read. And you're parsing out information in a sequence that's interesting and compelling, but it's also got to be enjoyable. And that monotony that Philip's pointing out of, subject, verb, object, takes away that enjoyment, right? We crave novelty, even in structures. And I think that's a huge consideration in all styles. So I find that in my work as well, Philip.
Yeah, great. I mean, it kind of brings me on to this next point as well that I had about style, which is sentence length is another important thing to consider. Obviously, that relates to sentence construction, right? If you have all simple sentences, they're likely to be short. Sometimes a problem is in some languages. Pete, I know you're in Chile. You're a Spanish speaker.
Yeah.
A lot of Latin languages, and especially Spanish, use much longer sentences than we like in English. I always say, we go crazy if there's more than 3 clauses. I start to lose my mind and think, where did this begin?
Yeah.
Why am I lost in this maze of a sentence? So yeah, long sentences can be another thing to break up, maybe, and definitely consider like how long consecutive sentences are, because in that way, yeah, you get this nice variety and you can build a good rhythm for readers to think about. And I think most language teachers are not talking about how long your sentences are. They just think if it's grammatically correct. So yeah, hopefully it's something new that we can tell our clients about and talk to people about.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Very nice.
Great point.
I've got
There's
this
that cultural difference
yeah.
in the language, right? There's a culture that's expressed in the language. And you hear often, you hear the Latin students talking about how their culture is so passionate. One of the means of expressing that passion is this sort of more verbose style compared to British culture. And, Canadian culture derives from British culture. And we can be characterized as being more reserved than the Latinos. And that expresses in our longing for concision, maybe.
Yeah, very true.
I don't know.
Ernest Hemingway style, right?
Yeah.
I've got this little piece to share, actually. Let me see if I can share it on screen. This is
Pete and I think there's a way to do that.
Can you guys see this now?
No,
not yet.
Oh, maybe here.
Yeah, now I can see it.
Oh, perfect. All right, great. Yeah, so this is a sort of little demonstration from a linguist and writer, Gary Provost. And I'll just read it because I think nothing demonstrates what I'm talking about better than this piece. So here we go. This sentence has 5 words. Here are 5 more words. 5-word sentences are fine, but several together become monotonous. Listen to what is happening. The writing is getting boring. The sound of it drones. It's like a stuck record. The ear demands some variety. Now listen. I vary the sentence length and I create music. Music. The writing sings. It has a pleasant rhythm, a lilt, a harmony. I use short sentences, and I use sentences of medium length, and sometimes when I'm certain the reader is rested, I will engage him with a sentence of considerable length, a sentence that burns with energy and builds with all the impetus of a crescendo, the roll of drums, the crash of cymbals. Sounds that say, listen to this, it is important. So write with a combination of short, medium, and long sentences. Create a sound that pleases the reader's ear. Don't just write words, write music.
Very nice.
Yeah.
It's funny that we're talking about this style, and I thought about sentence length because I saw this pop up on the social media feed just this week, and I've seen it a couple of times before, and it never fails to floor me. It's just such a beautiful demonstration of demonstrating something rather than saying vary your sentence lengths and that one's got 5 and that one's got 12 words. So yeah, I think hopefully viewers will see that as a good demonstration of what we're talking about when we say what's important with the style of English writing.
Yeah.
If one looks at a piece of fictional prose, just typographically looking at the document, you don't see blocks of paragraph of identical shape and size. You see all kinds of shapes, and they're different page to page. So that alone can demonstrate also how the language appears and sounds, right? I have a question for you guys. If we think of writing as music, as Philip just pointed out in that document, what kind of music are we trying to make our writing like? Or maybe we can answer that at the end of the podcast, but it's something to think about. If you were to get your students, encourage your students to think of their writing as being a form of music, what would it be?
Like a genre of writing mixed with or matched to a genre of music.
For example, that first sample in that document, Philip, that monotonous thing, reads to me the way electronic dance music can sound, with a monotonous beat that never varies, right? Now it's functional, it's there to be danced to, but sometimes there's not even a chorus or a verse broken off into, right? It's just steady rhythm.
Yeah,
that's not the kind of music.
I suppose if there's constant variety and syncopation, it's going to sound like jazz music, which can probably get tiring after a little while. So not all writing, it's a good idea to have these wildly varied sentences of sort of 1 or 28 words.
Yeah, and then it depends on the audience, doesn't it? So it's like there's a reason why some people, they like listening to electronic music. Other people like listening to jazz. So I guess you have to know, like, who are you writing for? Who is your audience? What kind of style is going to appeal to them?
Very good.
Yeah, good points. What about you, Pete? What style for you?
So I mean, think of like a traditional journalistic style. But the main objective of journalism is to inform people what's happening, and therefore the style should be easy to understand. That would be like the first key point. We've already talked quite a lot about sentence length, so I don't want to go much more into that. But yeah, just to summarize that, shorter sentences are often easier to understand than longer sentences, and that's why in traditional journalism, sentences tend to be short. So journalists tend to keep the number of words limited, and also the number of clauses, which is what you were talking about before, Phil. Apart from that, another thing that's really important is to be direct. So you want to, in journalism, you want to get to your point quickly, right? And in order to do that, you want to avoid wordiness. That's a big thing. So I was thinking about examples of wordiness that are quite common among students, and one that comes up again and again is because I've taught also a little bit like Paul. I've also taught academic writing, and I find that students, if they're doing academic writing or if they're doing journalistic writing, there's a certain I think it comes from Spanish. A lot of my students have been Spanish speakers, and they use this despite the fact that right, and then the main clause. It comes up again and again, and it's a good example of just where you can just use one word, although. Right? Although the weather in this part of Chile is usually quite beautiful, we've had some rain recently. Instead of saying, despite the fact that in this part of Chile, so that's just an example of wordiness that comes up quite a lot among my students. Another point could be that one thing that's good practice in journalism is to avoid these kind of long subordinate clauses before you get to your main point, right? So usually like a subordinate clause is more to set the context, right? So you have these conjunctions like when, if, because, right? You're going to give like a time frame or a condition, right? Or a reason, right? And a common mistake is for that to be kind of quite long at the beginning of your sentence before you get to your main point. And that is not easy to read. So it's always good practice to start, get straight to your main point, your main clause first, and then you can give the reason or the condition or the time frame after. These are just general rules. Of course, it's not always like that. I mean, going back to what we were talking about before, you also want to vary your sentence structures. Otherwise, it's going to be boring, right? So sometimes you might have this subordinate clause first. If you want to add that element of suspense, probably feel with your clients, you do a lot of creative writing. Suspense is something that you might work on a lot with your clients, and then that kind of subordinate clause first can work quite well. So that would be one thing. What do you think about that? Is that something that comes up in the genres that you help your clients with, being direct, or is that not really a priority? What about in academic writing, Paul?
Well, absolutely. In academic writing, the style serves the function. In academic writing, the point is the purpose of what you're doing is to explain something, whether it's an opinion or, I don't know, a piece of research. And so one of the things I'm always focused on is wordiness and being striving for concision and precision. So one of the things that I always encounter with my students is what I call too much seasoning on the sentence, right? If you take a beautiful piece of meat, if you like steak, or let's say you like sushi, sashimi, a piece of beautiful, delicious fish, and you just cover it with salt and pepper, well, then you're going to taste nothing but salt and pepper. You won't taste the fish or the steak. And it's the same thing with explaining an idea. If you cover it with too many words, too much wordiness, the meaning will be obscured. So a really simple example is the overuse of adverbs and adjectives. I see this all the time. For example, very. In academic writing, people are looking for precise information. So if you say there were the problem was very big, well, how big is very big? That's not very precise, right? So I encounter that issue all the time in what I do, for sure. How about you, Philip?
Yeah, I mean, touching on what you're saying about precision of word choice, I guess in fiction writing, the more modern take on wordiness is just to remove adjectives. I mean, if you can take a sentence from 5 adjectives to 2, it's probably going to be better, and definitely use precise verb choices, rather than, oh, she said loudly. Well, it's better to say she shouted or screamed. And what you were saying is interesting too, Pete, about these dependent clauses. I find it's a good idea to look to sort of analyze writing, right? If you look at a typical newspaper article, you'll see maybe 1 in 10 sentences, maybe 1 in 5, I don't know. It starts with a dependent clause. And in other types of writing, it might be more, it might be less, but it's a good measuring stick for writers to use, right? Analyze the writing that you're trying to achieve. Look in your newspaper and say, what am I seeing here? So, yeah, definitely agree on that.
Great, yeah. So, I mean, the other point. So, I have a third point. Would be about avoiding formal language, right? So, again, the main objective is to inform. Usually, typically your audience is quite broad, and so you want it to be easy to understand, and therefore you want to avoid formal language. There's a great quote by George Orwell. It goes something like this: "Why avoid a long word where a short one will do?" Is that right? Something
like that. Yeah.
Avoid a long word where a short one will do. And basically, because of this, right? The more long words you have, the more they tend to be formal, and you're just making it a little bit more difficult for some people in your audience to follow what you're saying. So, examples like using the word acquire, like acquire a computer. Why not just get a computer? Or ascertain, that's a good one. Ascertain what time the train is leaving, like just find out, right? It's just like avoiding these longer words, which I was going to ask you, Paul, if in academic writing, would you encourage your students to use those longer words or not? That would be an interesting question. Academic writing.
Yeah, in terms of academic writing, there's a time and place for those longer, more formal words, but just to sort of set up any discussion of academic writing, as I said earlier, style serves the function of academic writing. The function of academic writing is to explain a topic or express your opinion on it. And if that's the goal, for the reader to learn about a topic or to hear your view so they can perhaps debate it, they need to understand it. That's the goal. Whereas, for example, in creative writing, another goal might be to just experience the beauty of the language use. The elegance in academic writing comes from the clarity, the precision, the variety, yes, but the beauty of academic writing comes in explaining a complex idea very clearly and simply and accessibly. And so you're right, you're absolutely right. Overstuffing your academic writing with, what do they call them? $2 words or $5 words or overly long academic words really, really hurts that goal because it makes the complex idea harder to understand. So if you're writing a research paper about, I don't know, COVID research or something, well, these kind of topics are incredibly complex, and you're going to have a lot of contrasting and complex sentences where you're using contrasting or ironic parallel structures, all this kind of stuff to explain something that's not a simple black or white topic. And there may be a time where you have to use the most precise word, happens to be ascertain or something that has 5 syllables. Well, then you use that. But then I would encourage my clients for the rest of the sentence, try to use that really simple, accessible language to offset that word you absolutely needed. If you're writing about politics, there are certain terms in the political realm that are what they are, right? And they may be 5-syllable formal words. Formal words exist because they are precise. They are the word for that thing, and no other word capably describes it. So there is a time and place for that, but I urge simplicity everywhere else in the use of language, in the verb choice, in the reduction. I try to discourage adverbs and adjectives because they give too much of that salt and pepper sometimes. And people are looking for, in academics, they're looking for statistics and data and evidence rather than descriptions. And even if you're writing about an opinion in an argumentative essay, for example, they still want to be persuaded to accept your view based on the evidence you provide, not the adjectives that you flower the sentence with. So I think that word choice is a really huge factor in academic writing. There's no doubt about it. And my approach to coaching and teaching academic writing is the philosophy that you're goal is to make complex ideas simple. And we do that in using all of those techniques that you guys have talked about. And that's sort of at a basic level. At a higher level, for example, if I'm working with an academic or a professor who writes in English as their second or third or fourth language, they're capable of doing all that stuff already. At their level, my work tends to be more like getting the elegance in English into their writing so that it's not only an informative read, but it's a beautiful read. And so things like you've talked about already with varying sentence structures and lengths, and really learning to develop facility with the sentence types, like a periodic sentence, putting the most important word or idea at the end for a certain kind of emphasis, or putting the most important word or idea at the beginning of the sentence for a different kind of emphasis. Learning to manage those techniques elevates the elegance of their writing, assuming that they're already using that balance of the formal and the simple. So in answer to your question, Pete, there's a time and place for those really fancy words, because sometimes there is no other word that capably describes that thing the way that, big crazy word does. But if you're going to use that word, I would always encourage to balance clarity and simplicity elsewhere where it's possible.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that? Does that kind of, you've all been to school, so I'm sure you've experienced this.
I mean, yeah, I think depends on the audience. A lot of this comes back to the audience who's reading this, because I think a lot of a trap that some writers fall into is I want to use big, clever, important, fancy words because that makes me, seem smarter. And good writing, like effective writing, is what it delivers to the reader. So if it's a high school teacher reading the essay, you don't need to have 15 semicolons and
That's right.
5-syllable words littering a sentence. But then, like you said, Paul, for sort of high-level academic journals, it is a different kettle of fish. And it can be a good idea to use more formal words. So always think about the reader is my
absolutely
advice.
Yeah, great point. Yeah. The other point I was going to make was that so sometimes when you're writing in another language, you can be unintentionally formal if you translate from your first language. So it's something that I found with, especially with speakers of Romance languages. So I already said that, I quite a lot of Spanish speakers living here in Chile, also Italian speakers, French speakers. And what you find is that sometimes they'll translate a word from their first language to a similar word in English, but it turns out that the word in English sounds more formal than it does in their first language. So, for example, I remember one of my students, Spanish speaker, she wrote the word perturb sentence, right? And she was translating from Spanish, perturbar, which doesn't sound so formal in Spanish. It's used quite a lot. It's quite a high frequency word. But in English, of course, perturb is quite formal. So we would usually, use the word disturb, something like this. So that happens quite a lot. I mean, another example, like quite an extreme example, doesn't usually happen, is if a Spanish speaker would use the word explicate, right? Explicate something, right? Instead of explain something, because in Spanish, explicar is a really high frequency word. So that a little trap, I would say also to be aware of. And going back to what Phil, what you were talking about before, you made a great point about noticing. So that when you're reading, news articles, in the case of a lot of my clients, you want to learn and pick up the kind of language that good native speaker journalists are using, and start to build your vocabulary that way rather than translating from your own language, because then you can always fall into you can always make those mistakes. And of course, there's always a dictionary, right? So a good dictionary will tell you if you have a doubt, it will tell you if a word is formal or specialized. So you can always clear up a doubt that way.
I think there's a frequency of use checker. I'd have to look it up what it is, but I came across it the other week. I'd have to search for it, but yeah, it's a site you can check the commonality of a word, how frequently it's used. So perturb obviously would have a low score, and annoy or something, or
it's useful.
Disturb would have a high one. So it's useful to check, isn't it? Things like that, because you don't end up sounding like a 19th century high priest or something.
Right. Yeah.
That idea of frequency comes up often when I work with, because students will be writing about a specific topic, and a lot of them come to me having learned from English teachers and English courses and programs. They've learned to use synonyms, use variety, and that can be a trap also, because yes, we want variety, as we've spoken about with sentence structures and lengths, and we do want that with word choice as well. But we also have to remember, and certainly in academic writing, that clarity is a goal. Clarity is an imperative, because we're trying to make difficult, challenging, complex topics clear to a reader. And so what they often fall into this trap of, they'll take really important words that they've introduced in an introduction or a topic sentence of a paragraph, like there are three main things the government needs to change. They need to lower taxes. They need to introduce social support programs, blah, blah. Well, once they've said those things, those words become keywords. Those are directly expressive of the topic. So let's say social support programs. Well, then my students often fall in this trap of trying to find synonyms for that.
Yes, yeah.
And then they'll write those synonyms in the paragraph, and then the reader's lost. I thought you were talking about social support programs, will be the reaction. So I try to also work with them in terms of identifying the keywords to the topic that have to be repeated for cohesion. And then seek variety elsewhere, like in verbs or other grammatical word choices, rather than topical word choices, which need to be repeated to emphasize the topic or your position on it. So do you guys encounter that kind of thing too, with word frequency or repetition as a tool?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, generally we discourage repetition, but do you think it can also be used as a tool for clarity?
Yeah, definitely. So it's like what you said before, right? Where sometimes the word that you're going to use, maybe more than once, is just the best word. But that's one aspect. The other aspect is what you just said now. When they are key topic words, then you need to repeat them. And I think really I'm just repeating what you're saying, but students often fall into that trap of always trying to look for a synonym. And then actually, you just try to find a synonym for every word, and then you end up making actually your text harder to read, right?
Harder to read, yeah.
I mean, it's downgrading it, isn't it? If you choose a different word, if you're paraphrasing something or choosing a different word, it's often not the precise one, not the one you wanted. So you can end up sort of downgrading it.
I actually philosophically believe that synonyms, a lot of students are taught that synonyms are two different words with the same meaning. My personal belief is that they don't have the same meaning. They may be similar, they may be related, but if we have two words in use, that means they've continued to represent distinctive things and should be maintained distinctive. Otherwise, they would have evolved out of the language if they were redundant. Yeah. So I encourage my students to think about that. If that word really identifies that thing clearly, use it, because the other alternatives, the synonyms, may take us in a different direction, and the reader will stray off topic. They'll start thinking about other things. A single word can do that.
I had a discussion with some students the other day at university. They were talking about the word upset in English, and they wanted to know, like, what was the word for upset in Spanish. And we had a discussion about this because really there is not just one word in Spanish that is exactly the same as upset in every context. It really depends on different contexts, and that just really emphasizes the point that you're making, Paul, that in the same way that no synonym in the same language is exactly the same. Also, when you translate one word from one language to another language, also quite often it's not exactly the same, or never exactly the same. Right?
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Very
with that, Phil?
interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, going back to the question about repetition, I think it was, I'd say on the synonym front, I often advise people to think of word forms, because instead of switching out happy for, ecstatic, they're quite different. They're not the same meaning, even though you could use one or the other. If you want to avoid overusing happy, you can change the word form. You could transform it to a noun, happiness, or use, the opposite, maybe unhappy, not unhappy, but just there's some options there for doing it. And in terms of literature and repetition, I suppose it can have a different function. I mean, repetition is maybe used for emphasis a bit more. If you want to really emphasize a character's woes and troubles, you might repeat a thought or a phrase, even word for word. So yeah, that's maybe a technique that can work in fiction, but generally
it has more of a poetic function, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting I think you both talked a little bit about paraphrasing, and what you just mentioned there, Phil, about you can use the same word but in a different word form. As you said, like happiness, the noun, instead of happy, the adjective. That can be a way to avoid repetition. And then that's also interesting in terms of style, right? So in journalism, we often say that you want to keep the language alive. Right? The style should be alive with a lot of using a lot of verbs and things. But I wonder if for Paul in academic writing, with your students, do you use a lot of nominalization? Do you get students to nominalize instead of using the verbs? Get them to use the noun. Does that make a more academic style, or can that make it sometimes more difficult to read? What's your view on that?
Yeah, that's another trap. Nominalizing everything leads you to these huge long noun phrases where you might qualify one noun with 5 other nouns. And I think that gets out of control. Because we're not telling stories, we're less focused on what characters did. So the verbs don't have that vivid characteristic they do certainly in literature, in fiction, but also in journalism, because you're recounting something that people may have done. So some nominalization is unavoidable because we're focusing on a thing or a topic or an idea. But it does get out of control. And it is something that even native speaking writers in academics have to really, it's a wild horse you've got to really harness, I think, because it can easily get out of control. And then you're back into the same problem of that unreadability, that monotony that comes from nominalizing everything. So where possible, I'd like to remind students to, get verbal. Tell me what happened, or what, say, the researchers did. Oscillate between those focuses, and break up the pattern of talking about things with actions, right? It kind of leads me to another point I wanted to ask you guys about, because this is something that always comes up in academic writing. And it's this debate about whether a writer should use or avoid personal pronouns like I did this, or I think, or we must, right? A lot of students are taught, students I encounter are taught, avoid that 100%. And they'll ask me why. And I'll say, well, I don't accept that as a rule. However, if you have a sentence like, in my opinion, the government should implement support programs, or I think the government should implement support programs. That's one way to say that. That's one way to express your opinion. Another is to drop I think and just say the government should implement support programs, and then provide evidence why they should do that and reasons. And my student will say, well, then how do I express my opinion? I said, well, you are expressing your opinion indirectly when you say the government should. Well, how do they know it's my opinion? I said, well, you wrote the damn paper. Your name's on it. It's obvious whose opinion that is. In fact, that will make it stronger because it almost sounds like the same phrasing as a fact, right? Water freezes at 0 degrees. The government should implement social programs. And the second thing that occurs when we do that is taking away I think, which is a subject and a verb. That focuses on you, I, and what I do. Take the focus away from us and focus on the topic, what governments should do. And I try to encourage them to see that that is the reason, that's the strategy behind that. Not just a rule to avoid pronouns, but that sometimes is all they're taught, and they don't understand why they need to do that. On the other hand, if they're involved in the topic, like they participated in the experiment, then it's perfectly legitimate to recount that and say, with, in a sense, it's a bit of narration, like next we dried the whatever I don't know. Next we examined the molecules, and then switch the focus. The molecules revealed that. So, in your work with students, do you ever encounter that personal pronoun debate or confusion? I guess it is really.
I mean, I was thinking about it the other day relating to job applications. When you apply for a job, if your cover letter, every sentence is beginning I have lots of experience, I've worked for these companies, I would be great for your company. I think it's definitely good to reduce that and to offset those. And it's because of the reader. If there's an HR representative reading a cover letter that's I, they care about their company and their objectives. So sometimes I think what you can do is switch them out for, possessive, my, object pronouns, and sometimes just inset them into the sentence. So even if you add a time expression, like in the last 10 years, I have done this, it just takes the focus away from that a little bit. And I guess the same in fiction writing. Trying to reduce the use of I think is a key one.
Even in a first-person novel, they have to be careful with that, right?
As I bombs, because if you have 50 on a page, then it does become noticeable, even though they're quite hard to avoid.
Mm-hmm. What's the take on that with journalism, Pete?
To be honest, it's not something that's really come up as an issue with my clients. What I was thinking about was that sometimes you might also want to distance yourself. So it might be that actually, if you're discussing something, right, for example, in an essay, right, it might be that you want to distance yourself so that it's not actually your opinion, but you're presenting two sides of a discussion, for example. And then you might use other structures like, I don't know, it is said that, it is thought that, some consider that. So there could be other structures that are useful to use if you want to distance yourself from the discussion. So you're presenting more two sides of a discussion without giving your own personal opinion. That could also be, and again, it always depends on the genre, right? So if it's like a discussion essay, then you might do that. But yeah, so different structures depending on what your objective is. I guess again, depending on your audience. So there's so many things to consider when you make these choices, right?
It's all interactive, right? It's an accumulative effect. I have this problem that comes up with my students where they want to use adjectives to express the strength of their assertions or claims. So there's two things I try to discourage them from, and it goes back to things I've mentioned already. The idea of peppering the sentence with too many words. They'll say things like, "I strongly believe the government should," and then they won't explain anything or offer any supporting evidence. So I'll tell them, when you say you strongly believe something, that doesn't convince me. And one of the goals of your writing is to convince the reader to accept your proposition. Or in the best case, writing has the power to change minds. Not just to present something, but, present it persuasively. And saying I strongly believe something won't do it. Certainly not for me as a reader. I need evidence. I need your solid explanation. I need details. I need to know why you believe that. And if you present that thoroughly, it becomes clear that you strongly believe that. But saying I strongly believe something and then offering no reason for it doesn't sound like you strongly believe it. It sounds like you just throwing that word in there because someone told you that's the way to pass an IELTS exam or something. Do you guys have this what's the word? This problem with wordiness? Does that come up often with you? This peppering the sentence with words they think will add to the power?
But basically, what they're doing is they're wasting words, aren't they? They're using more words, but they're not really saying anything. They're not like you said. They're not really supporting their argument, right, with details, with examples, reasoning. So yeah, I think wordiness is just that. It's wasting words without really saying anything.
Yeah, I think sometimes people don't know what to cut as well. It takes practice and some help sometimes, because students at school, university, they're maybe taught how to build sentences and they may be translating them from their own languages, but they're not taught, here's a 500-word article, let's summarize it or cut it down to 200. That would be a useful exercise, right?
That's a brilliant point, Philip, because when I worked at a language school, we had 12 levels, and they spent all of those 12 levels going from beginner, a subject, verb, and an object sentence, to getting to the point where they can make a more elaborate sentence. But really what comes after that is learning to edit, right? Learning to, okay, now you can make this big verbose sentence. Now it's time to learn to cut the crap and learn how to be concise and precise rather than focusing all your energy on trying to please your teacher, I suppose, or impress a reader with what a complex sentence you can construct. It's almost like that never gets taught, or they never get to the point where that can be taught.
Is that
that's where we come in.
Sorry, Paul. I was just going to say, is that your main sort of takeaway? Is that your main point for what style is? What's important for you in academic writing?
I think if I were to summarize everything that I'm concerned with and that I've mentioned here, it's in pursuit of clarity and precision, we want concision. Maybe that's a good way to summarize it. We want to cut the garbage, cut the salt and pepper, so that we can taste the steak and the fish. I don't know. People eat sushi because sushi at its best is delicious, well-farmed rice cooked to perfection, and a beautiful quality fish cut to perfection. Nothing else. And that's why it's delicious. You don't put a whole bunch of crap on it. And I think academic writing, that's definitely a goal that I emphasize when I work with students, right? In pursuit of clarity and precision, we want concision. How about you guys? How would you encapsulate your vision of style for your clients and your genre?
So, I mean, my takeaway would be basically always think about your reader. One of my students, she talked about learning to empathize with your reader. I thought it was really good way of explaining this. And yeah, basically by keeping it short and sweet, but not boring, as we were talking about, keeping the variety of a sentence, structures, length, keeping it direct, get to the point, right? And avoid formal language, right? So the objective is make your writing easy to understand for your reader.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on variety. That's my takeaway point definitely for content writing and for literature as well, creative writing. We need a lot of variety as readers to keep us interested. You know, when somebody's making a speech, it's not so important. We're much more forgiving of, people repeating the same words, phrases, constructions. So yeah, my takeaway for making your creative writing stylish is to write music and to vary that sentence length and construction.
Nice.
Well, guys, I'm curious also to share with our viewers and our listeners where they can find you guys and what sort of projects you're working on these days. Phil, where can they find you and what are you working on these days? Sure,
I'm working on lots of different things. In terms of my fiction writing, you can visit my website. That's my name, philipcharter.com. You can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn at English Writing Coach as well. And if any of the viewers have any questions or maybe suggestions for future things we could talk about on the podcast, that'd be great. So yeah, please get in touch. Pete?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Pete Pozner. Also on Facebook. I have a Facebook group, English Communication Skills for Journalists. What am I doing these days? Well, I'm helping journalists one-to-one writing program. So to help with style, right? Keeping your writing simple, understandable for your audience, and also helping with vocabulary building so you can say exactly what you want to say, right? And keeping it engaging, right? And also the grammar side of things, right? Also so that you, basically keep your writing nice and accurate. Any of those grammar problems, we'll sort those out too. And also just starting with groups too, which I'm quite excited about. Starting to help a small media company who work in sports journalism. Also helping them with a group writing course too. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing at the moment. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, my main project and presence online is Hard Boiled English. You can find that on my website, hardboiledenglish.com, LinkedIn, Facebook. YouTube channel is Hard Boiled English. Until last week, I was streaming a weekly live show on Friday evenings, and I've shut that down for the summer. I'm going to reformat it and then come back to it in September. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I've been working on an online course, and it's an online writing course, and that can be found at writingworkshop.thinkific.com. And I'll definitely put all these links for all of us in the show notes on Spotify, YouTube, and all that. But the writing course is an online course. It's going for a very, very low price right now because it's under construction. I'm adding lessons as soon as they're done. Right now there's 5 lessons or 6 lessons, and eventually there'll be 15 in this course. So it's going at a very ridiculously low price at the moment, which will eventually raise. But that's a project I've thrown a lot of effort and time into this year. So yeah, and then I continue to work with private clients, some of whom are taking the summer off. So I'm less busy than usual, but that's okay. It's summer here and I've got to get out and get some sun on my dome.
Make the most of that weather while we can, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I guess that's it from us until next episode. So we'll see you next time when we'll be talking about more writing issues and solutions.
Great. Great to have this conversation with you guys.
My cat just came here to say hello as well. I don't know if you could hear that.
That's awesome. Guest appearance.
Just in time, just before the end of the episode.
All right. So
well, thanks for the conversation, guys. Yeah.
See
you guys next time.
All right.
And see you next time.
Okay. Keep writing, everybody.